Okay, let's unpack this. Flying machines. Not, from some sci-fi movie, but described in ancient Sanskrit texts. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are we looking at echoes of some forgotten science?
Yeah.
Or maybe elaborate fiction from ancient storytellers? Or, well, something else entirely?
It's a question that definitely grabs your attention. And today we're taking a real deep dive into a unique document that, well, it tries to answer that. The Vimanika Shastra.
Exactly. Forget dusty scrolls found in a cave for a moment. Our focus today is this specific text. It claims to be a translation of ancient aeronautical science.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the twist. It surfaced in a really unusual way, right? In the early 20th century.
That's right. It was published much later, 1973, by G.R. Josier. But the book itself attributes its knowledge to the Vedic sage Maharshi Bharadwaja,
Okay.
supposedly channeled, dictated through a Pandit Subbaraya Shastry.
Channeled. Wow.
Yeah. And the story of its origin, dictated apparently just before World War I, written down between maybe 1918 and 1923, and then nothing, unpublished for decades before that limited release. It's a real head-scratcher.
Absolutely. And for you, the listener, think of this as a rapid climb into a very intriguing, maybe peculiar area. It's where history, technology, and let's just say unique claims all sort of intersect. We want to give you a solid understanding of what this Vimanika Shastra actually lays out. What were these alleged flying machines the Vimanas supposedly like? How were they built? What could they do?
Yeah, what's in the text?
Right. Our mission here is to explore the content, the mechanics, the capabilities, even how these Vimanas were categorized within the text itself.
Yeah.
And we want to do it all with an open but definitely informative mind.
Keeping it objective.
Exactly. So with such a fascinating, frankly, weird backstory, where do we even begin to make sense of it all?
Well, the origins, like you said, are a puzzle. The preface by John Brunohair, which is included in that 1973 edition, it really sets the stage quite well.
Okay.
He talks about how this Pandit Subbaraya Shastry, in the years just before World War I, apparently started dictating these Sanskrit texts.
Dictating them, not finding them.
Dictating them, exactly. Claiming they contained ancient Indian technological wisdom, specifically from sages like Maharshi Bharadwaja. So this act of dictation is really significant. It presents the text not as, a rediscovered ancient manuscript, but as newly revealed knowledge.
That is quite a claim, isn't it? I mean, imagine someone in, say, 1910 saying they're channeling detailed technical schematics from ancient Egypt or something.
Right. Hare makes a great comparison, actually. He says it's almost like someone writing a book on ancient aircraft in biblical Hebrew and saying Moses dictated it.
Wow. Yeah, that puts it in perspective.
It really highlights just how unusual the whole origin story is.
And the time frame you mentioned, dictated before WWI, written down 1918 to 1923. That's specific.
It is, and that timeline is really important. But then there's this other layer of intrigue. The fact it just sat there unpublished for over 50 years.
50 years.
Yeah. It finally gets this limited release by G.R. Josier in 73, including his English translation. And then the English part alone gets reprinted later in 1991. This huge delay, between creation and publication, it naturally makes you ask questions. Why? What happened in those 50 years?
50 years seems like an incredibly long time for something potentially revolutionary, or at least wildly controversial, to stay hidden.
It does.
And Hare mentions, you said, that even when it was published, it was a very limited edition, and the book itself, it didn't look impressive.
Not at all, according to Hare. He describes it almost comically, a pink silk binding, really poor print quality, not exactly the grand presentation you'd expect for, rediscovered ancient secrets of flight.
Pink silk and bad printing.
Okay. It's a crucial observation, I think. Hare is pretty open about his initial skepticism, and this, shall we say, unassuming physical form of the book definitely fuels that.
Yeah.
He kind of wryly compares its look to a defective vintage U.S. high school yearbook. Yeah. So you have this massive contrast, extraordinary claims inside, very mundane, almost shoddy appearance outside. It really makes you think about the context it came out of.
And what about the language? Sanskrit. I mean, composing a technical manual in Sanskrit in the early 20th century.
Well, Hare acknowledges that's very impressive, linguistically speaking. Sanskrit has this continuous tradition, but writing 100 pages of technical stuff, that takes skill.
For sure.
But, as Hare also points out, just because someone can write it doesn't mean the content is genuinely ancient. It shows the author's skill, yes, but it doesn't validate the source of the information itself.
Right. Skill doesn't equal authenticity of the content's origin.
Exactly. And it's really vital for you, the listener, to understand this key point. This isn't presented as finding some lost ancient artifact.
Okay.
There are no claims anywhere of physical manuscripts existing before, say, 1918. Hare states it clearly. The Vimanika Shastra was first committed to writing between 1918 and 1923, and nobody is claiming that it came from some mysterious antique manuscript.
So not a forgery in the usual sense, like faking an old document.
Precisely. It's not pretending to be an old object. Instead, the claim is about newly revealed ancient knowledge channeled through Shastry.
Which leads us then to the big question. Okay, forget the origin story for a second. What does the Vimanika Shastra actually say? What did these Vimanas supposedly do?
Right, this is where it gets really, really fascinating. The text lays out what Hare calls this intriguing list of Vimana capabilities.
Intriguing.
And as you read through them, many sound, well, surprisingly familiar, almost like technologies we'd recognize today, especially maybe in military or surveillance contexts.
Countermeasures from ancient times, or at least described that way in the early 1900s. That sounds like something straight out of, well, science fiction. What kind of capabilities are we talking about?
Okay, so get this. The text talks about Vimanas being able to view remote images on screens.
Like television?
Almost. Like a primitive form of television or maybe remote surveillance drones today. This capability is linked to something called the Vishwakriya Darpana, the television mirror. It suggests this idea of transmitting and seeing visual information remotely.
Wow.
It also mentions listening to remote sounds, so acoustic surveillance too.
Okay, remote viewing, remote listening. What else?
Beyond just sensing things, there are descriptions of disguising the Vimana, making it look like clouds or other shapes, for camouflage.
Stealth technology.
Kind of. A concept very familiar today, right? But maybe the most dramatic one.
Yep.
The text details how Vimanas could create terrifying sounds specifically to frighten enemies.
Sonic weapons.
Essentially, yeah. Psychological warfare using sound.
Rote viewing, camouflage, sonic weapons. That is quite a list. It almost sounds like, I don't know, a spec sheet for a modern spy plane or something, but framed as ancient.
It does have that feel sometimes.
Were these Vimanas just for flying, purely aerial, or did they do other things?
Interestingly, no, not just aerial. The Vimanika Shastra describes some pretty versatile designs, including Vimanas that could function as boats or even submarines.
Boats and submarines.
Yep. Capable of traveling on or underwater as well as through the air. This idea of a single vehicle operating in multiple domains, air, water, maybe land, that's something modern engineers are still actively working on,
Amphibious and submersible aircraft. From an ancient text, or at least a text claiming to be ancient, that's certainly ambitious for any era.
Highly ambitious.
Did the text get into the practical side of actually flying these things? Like, did it talk about the atmosphere or navigation?
Yes, surprisingly it did. There are discussions included about the structure of the atmosphere.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and potential aeronautic hazards, how to avoid them. It suggests some level of maybe conceptual understanding of the environment they were supposed to fly in. And even more peculiar, there's a whole section dedicated to the diet and clothing for the pilot.
Diet and clothing for Vimana pilots. That's a level of detail I absolutely was not expecting.
Right. It makes it sound almost like an operational manual.
What kind of recommendations did it give? Like ancient astronaut flight suits?
Well, we'll dive deeper into the specifics of pilot provisions later, but it's just fascinating that these seemingly mundane, practical aspects were considered important enough to include in this, supposed treatise on ancient aeronautics.
Definitely adds a layer of realism, or at least attempted realism.
It does. The text also touches on something else, the idea of flight in earlier yugas, the different epochs in Hindu cosmology.
Ah, the yugas, right.
It suggests that in those earlier, more spiritually advanced times, people could fly without any mechanical aids at all.
Just fly. By themselves.
Yeah, like an inherent human ability linked to their spiritual purity or power.
So that shifts things, doesn't it? From pure technology to something more. Metaphysical. Innate human power.
Exactly, it adds that dimension. But when we get back to the mechanical Vimanas, the ones built with these 32 contrivances we'll talk about, did the descriptions involve any, totally unknown physics or magical elements, or were they grounded in what people might have imagined in the early 20th century?
Good question. Did it mention unobtainium or anything?
No, and this is a really key observation Hare makes. He says there is, quote, Nothing here which Jules Verne couldn't have dreamed up, no mention of exotic elements or advanced construction techniques that really go beyond the imagination of the early 1900s.
Ah, okay. So grounded in the science of that time, or the imagination of that time.
Pretty much. The descriptions seem to rely heavily on materials and principles that were known or at least conceivable back then. Things like mechanics, electricity, maybe some chemistry or alchemy.
Right.
Applied in very specific and, yeah, from a modern engineering view, often quite impractical ways. This suggests that the text, regardless of its claimed ancient origin, might be more reflective of the technological ideas and, frankly, the dreams of the time it was actually written down.
That makes sense. And what about the pictures? The illustrations that came with the Vimanika Shastri. Hare apparently called them absurdly unaerodynamic.
Oh, yeah. His description is priceless. He calls them brutalist wedding cakes with minarets, huge ornithopter wings, and dinky propellers.
Brutalist wedding cakes with minarets. I'm trying to picture that.
It's quite an image, isn't it? Basically, they look like fantasy flying machines from that era, but with a kind of Indian architectural flair added on.
Ornithopter wings.
Like flapping wings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which reflects that old pre-Wright brothers fascination with imitating bird flight, which, mostly didn't work out for heavier than aircraft.
Right.
And it's important to note, like Hare points out, these drawings don't look anything like modern UFO reports, the typical discs or cigars, nor do they really match up with many other artistic depictions of Vimanas you might see in, say, popular Hindu art. So they're kind of unique to this text.
They seem to be. It reinforces this idea that the text's vision of ancient flight is maybe filtered through a much more contemporary, early 20th century lens.
Brutalist wedding cakes. Okay, I won't forget that. So it seems that the Vimanika Shastri paints this picture of, well, technologically capable flying machines, but the details feel very much of their time, the early 1900s, maybe overlaid with some pretty wild capabilities.
That sums it up pretty well.
All right, let's dive into the actual nuts and bolts then, or, the ancient equivalents. What did the text say about the technical stuff, the machinery? You mentioned 32 mechanical contrivances.
Yes, exactly. The text, particularly drawing from a section it calls Kriya Sara, introduces this idea of 32 essential mechanical devices. The Sanskrit term is upayantrani.
Upayantrani, okay.
Think of them as the key components or subsystems needed for a Vimana to actually work, according to this text. The number itself, 32, suggests a pretty complex machine, at least in how it was imagined.
32 essential parts. Yeah, that does sound complex. Can you give us some examples? What kind of things are on this list?
Sure. The list includes things like a universal reflecting mirror, which, as we discussed, sounds like it relates to that remote viewing capability.
Right. The television mirror.
Possibly. Then there's a force-absorbing machine, a halo-producing machine.
A halo-producing machine. What would that do?
It's not entirely clear. Maybe defensive, signaling, who knows. There's also a machine for folding up or contracting its parts.
Folding up. Like shrinking.
It suggests that, yeah. Maybe changing shape or size for defense or maneuverability. Then there's a fantastic mirror, again, vague, a darkness spreading machine.
A darkness spreader.
Okay, and an electric generator, which is a big one, among many others. It's this mix of seemingly practical ideas, like a generator, and more fantastical ones, like spreading darkness. That's really characteristic of the text.
A folding machine and an electric generator. That's quite a combo. We definitely need to come back to that electric generator idea. But these mirrors sound key, especially with the remote viewing and camouflage stuff mentioned earlier. The text listed several specific mirrors, right?
Yes, it goes into some detail on several types. One of the main ones is that Vishwakriya Darpana, described as the television mirror for observing the surroundings.
Okay.
And what's really striking is the supposed manufacturing process. It's incredibly elaborate. It involves this complex mix of ingredients, things like eagle bone, mercury, mica, pearl dust, and get this, eyeballs of a specific type of fish called samyaka.
Wait, fish eyeballs?
Yeah.
For a television mirror?
Yep, all ground up, mixed, and subjected to a very specific heating process in a special kind of furnace.
Okay. From a modern science view, that sounds more like alchemy than electronics or optics.
Exactly. It's very hard to see how that specific recipe would lead to remote image viewing based on physics as we understand it. It feels much more aligned with older alchemical traditions or maybe symbolic correspondences.
Samyaka fish eyeballs. I won't forget that either. What else could this television mirror do besides just look around?
Well, the text claims it gave the pilot a really comprehensive, detailed view of everything around the aircraft. picking up minute details even. So it speaks to that desire for total situational awareness, which is crucial in flying and fighting, ancient or modern.
Makes sense. What other special mirrors were there? You mentioned force absorption.
Right. That was the Shaktakarshana Darpana, the power-capturing mirror. It was said to neutralize destructive forces.
Like what?
Things like strong winds, intense solar rays, even fire forces that could apparently have evil effects on the plane and the pilot. It sounds almost like, a sci-fi energy shield.
A mirror that acts like a shield. Wow, what is that one made of? Any less weird ingredients?
Still pretty eclectic, I'm afraid. The recipe includes yellow orpiment, diamond, red mica, burning coal, sand, and even tortoise egg, among other things. Again, heated in a specific way.
Diamond, tortoise egg. Okay.
Maybe the diamond suggests hardness or power, but again, the link to actually neutralizing wind or fire. It's not based on known science.
Seems like a pattern here.
Very much so. Then there's the Varupya Darpana, the appearance-changing mirror. This one's even more imaginative.
Appearance changing. How?
It was supposedly used to terrify enemies by making the Vimana look like something else entirely. It could apparently project 27 different terrifying shapes: fire, water, lions, tigers, giant birds.
A shape-shifting Vimana, pure psychological warfare through illusion.
Exactly. Visual manipulation on a grand scale.
What went into that mirror? More eyeballs.
No eyeballs this time, but the list is long. Bone salt, zinc, iron, mercury, yellow orpiment again, silver, even licorice oil. All purified 7 times, then heated and poured into a mold.
Licorice oil. Okay.
Then you had the Kuntini mirror, said to derange enemy minds with its glare and also protect against poisonous whirlwinds in the upper sky.
Poisonous whirlwinds. That's oddly specific.
It is. And the Pendula mirror, designed purely to protect the pilot's eyes from harmful effects of conflicting solar rays. Apparently, there were 4 types of evil solar glows to worry about.
So a whole suite of specialized mirrors for seeing, attacking, defending, confusing enemies, even protecting against specific atmospheric hazards. It's incredibly detailed, if scientifically baffling.
It paints a very vivid, very imaginative picture of aerial capabilities.
You also mentioned an electric generator, the Vidyut Yantra. That seems particularly out of place, doesn't it, for an ancient text?
It certainly stands out. The text mentions it, and apparently the illustrations included in some versions even show sectional elevation and top view plans for it.
Plans, like blueprints.
Sort of. Basic diagrams. It suggests some conceptual understanding of electricity was woven into this narrative.
But could it actually work based on the description?
Well, the descriptions of how it's built and operates aren't really detailed enough in the available excerpts to compare meaningfully with, say, Faraday's work in the 19th century. But its presence in the text is definitely notable. It might reflect the growing awareness and excitement about electricity around the time the Vimanika Shastra was actually being written down, early 20th century.
Yeah, maybe projecting current tech back into the past. It happens.
It does.
Okay, so electric generator. Plans. What about other standout yantras from that list of 32? Anything else particularly strange or interesting?
Several others jump out. There's one called Aparoksha, which seems related to remote viewing, maybe linked to that television mirror.
Okay.
Then we have Sankocha for contraction and danger, suggesting, again, that shrinking or folding ability.
Becoming a smaller target.
Possibly. And its opposite, Vistrita, for expansion in certain parts of the sky, maybe for lift, maneuvering. Hard to say. The Sarpagana described as serpentine, snake-like movement, maybe for agility or evasion.
Wriggling through the air.
Kind of sounds like it. The Chapala was meant for shaking enemy planes using atmospheric waves.
Shaking them with air waves.
Doesn't really explain how, just says it could. A very imaginative form of aerial combat. And Sarvatomuka allowed the Vimana to spin around really fast to face attackers coming from anywhere.
Like a turret. Or the whole plane spinning.
Sounds like the whole plane could revolve agilely. Then there was even a Stambhana Yantra, a halting machine.
Halting what?
Halting hurricanes.
Yeah.
To be used against them, suggesting an incredible ability to control or influence massive weather systems.
Well, that's really out there, stopping hurricanes.
It is. And finally, a Vishwanara Nala Yantra for creating fire, a straightforward offensive weapon.
So serpentine movement, shaking enemies with air, stopping hurricanes, shooting fire. The capabilities are just extraordinary. Often, bordering on pure fantasy from a scientific view.
It paints a picture of an incredibly versatile, incredibly powerful aircraft, far beyond anything verifiably achieved in ancient times, or even really in the early 20th century when this was written.
Which would require skilled pilots. You mentioned guidelines for them earlier. What did the text say about how these ancient aviators were supposed to live? It covered diet, you said.
Yes. It includes surprising detail on pilot provisions. It actually prescribes a diet of 5 meals a day for air pilots.
5 meals. Why so many?
The text suggests it was necessary to maintain peak physical fitness and alertness for the demands of flying these complex machines. High energy expenditure, perhaps? Or maybe just reflecting dietary ideas of that era. It consisted of things like cooked grains, gruel, baked bread, and essence extracts from various foods.
Essence extracts. Like supplements.
Sort of sounds like it. The text even cites specific, supposedly older food manuals like Ashana Kalpa and Pakasarvasva for more details on these diets.
So it tried to ground the dietary advice in other texts.
It seems so.
Yeah.
It also notes that meal frequency varied, family men ate less often, ascetics even less. But air pilots needed those 5 meals. So a tailored approach based on lifestyle and occupation. And here's another forward-thinking bit. It mentions the concept of vitamin pills or food balls.
Ancient astronaut rations.
Pretty much. Made from these essence extracts to be used if regular food wasn't available during long flights. Shows a practical consideration for mission endurance, even if the pills themselves are vaguely described.
That is a clever detail, adds to the narrative's internal logic.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond food, what about materials? You mentioned metallurgy before.
Right. The text also touches on metallurgy. It offers a theory about how metals form influenced by Earth's gravity, celestial gravity, heat, moisture. It's a more philosophical, maybe proto-scientific take on material origins.
Okay. Not exactly geology or chemistry as we know it.
Not quite. But it does describe an elaborate process for purifying metals. This is detailed in a section called Musha Kalpa.
How elaborate.
Very. It involves numerous ingredients, manure, metal rust, specific plants, gums, salts, all mixed and baked in a particular way. This focus on complex purification suggests they believed the purity of the materials was absolutely critical for building Vimanas.
Like ancient alchemy meets material science. Was there one special metal that was most important?
Yes, definitely. The text repeatedly mentions a special metal called Rajaloha.
Rajaloha. What does that mean?
Roughly translates to royal metal, or maybe superior metal. It's presented as the primary go-to material for constructing Vimanas, implying it have unique, necessary properties.
But it doesn't say what elements are in it or how it's made.
Not in the excerpts commonly discussed, no. Its specific composition and production remain unclear, but its importance as the Vimana material is heavily emphasized.
Rajaloha. The stuff of ancient flying machines.
Yeah.
Okay, now the Vimanika Shastra also classifies these Vimanas based on the different yugas, the epochs in Hindu cosmology. That adds another layer entirely. Can you break down that classification?
Yeah, it's quite systematic, actually. According to the text, the type of Vimana available depended on the characteristics of the yuga people were living in: Krita, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali.
The 4 main yugas.
In the first yuga, the Krita yuga considered the golden age. Spiritually pure, less reliant on external tech Vimanas were called mantrikas. But here's the thing. They were supposedly powered by the inherent spiritual abilities of humans themselves. No mechanics needed.
Like you mentioned before, people could just fly using their own power.
Exactly. It ties back to that idea of innate human flight capability in the most pristine era.
Fascinating. So what happened in the next yuga, the Treta Yuga, as things supposedly started to decline a bit?
In the Treta Yuga, the Vimanas were still called mantrikas, but the power source shifted. Now, they were described as being produced or powered through mantras.
Mantras, like chanting.
Potent hymns, incantations, yes, using sound or spiritual energy generated by these mantras. The text lists about 25 or 32 types of these mantra-powered Vimanas, with names like Pushpaka, which appears in the Ramayana and Ajamuka, so a shift from innate power to a kind of sonic or spiritual technology.
Okay, from inner power to mantra power. What about the Dwapara Yuga?
In the Dwapara Yuga, tantric knowledge was said to have become more prominent, so the Vimanas became tantrikas.
Powered by Tantra?
Manufactured using tantric knowledge, yeah.
Yeah.
Which often involves rituals, harnessing natural energies in specific ways. 56 varieties of these are mentioned, including Bhairava and Nandaka.
56.
Yeah. Interestingly, the text notes that in shape and movement, these tantrikas were similar to the earlier mantrikas. The key difference was their adaptation of the power of sky and earth, suggesting maybe a more direct manipulation of natural forces rather than just mantras.
So innate, then mantra, then tantra, reflecting the changing spiritual landscape of the yugas. Which brings us to the current age, The Kali Yuga, the age of conflict and decline in cosmology. What kind of Vimanas do we get then?
In the Kali Yuga, which is our current era according to this cosmology, the power of mantras and tantras is said to have waned significantly. So the Vimanas prevalent now are the Kritakas. This means artificial or man-made. These are the ones that rely on the mechanical contrivances, the metals, the energy sources we've been discussing.
So the Kritakas are the focus of most of the technical descriptions.
Exactly. The text highlights 25 types of these Kritaka Vimanas and gives specific examples like Shakuna, Sundara, and Rukma, which we can look at in more detail. This whole classification system basically creates a narrative arc for flight technology, tying it directly to the spiritual state of humanity across the cosmic cycles.
It's a really neat framework, isn't it? Linking tech level to the Yuga. Okay, let's look at those Kritaka Vimanas then, the artificial ones. Can you walk us through some examples? What are the Shakuna Vimana?
Right, the Shakuna, according to the text, it had planned dimensions. 80 feet high, a base 56 feet long and wide, and a distinctive three-cornered tip, sort of pyramidal on top.
Okay, quite large. What were its key parts?
It mentions the pitha, which is the base structure, and a nalastamba, a hollow mast running up through it. This mast apparently had internal wheels for controlling airflow, maybe for lift or steering.
Internal wheels for airflow. Interesting concept.
It also had wheels at different heights on the exterior, a window dome for the pilot to see out of, and something called a sun crystal.
A sun crystal. What was that supposed to do? Power. Navigation.
The name definitely suggests something solar-related, doesn't it? The excerpt doesn't spell out its exact function, but harnessing solar energy in some way seems likely, whether for power or maybe some kind of optical device.
Intriguing. What about inside the Shakuna?
Described with 3 floors, each 14 feet high, it mentions heating yantras, those mechanisms, again, in the corners of the floors, suggesting climate control, and passenger boxes on the ground floor.
So it could carry people.
Yes. And below that, a sort of cellar area. This housed oil tanks and bellows, suggesting maybe combustion or steam power elements, and also ground wheels for moving on land.
So it wasn't just for flying, you could drive around too.
Seems like it. That combination of air and ground capability pops up again.
Okay, so the Shakuna. Multi-level, potentially solar-assisted air and ground vehicle. What about the Sundara Vimana? How did that one differ?
The Sundara was described as having 8 main parts. There's a pitha base again, a smoke chimney, 5 gas engines.
5 gas engines. That sounds very early 20th century.
It really does, doesn't it? A direct parallel to propulsion systems being developed then. It also had a buja metal pipe, a wind blower, an electricity generator, a 4-faced heater, and an outer cover.
Gas engines and an electricity generator. What was the base like?
The pitha for the Sundara was made of that special Rajaloha metal. Could be square or round, pretty big, up to 100 feet across, 8 feet thick. And it had a central fume distributing pipe, 12 feet high, sticking up from it.
Okay. What were the gas engines powering? Do we know?
The text doesn't detail their exact function in this part, but it does describe a related component, the Dumadgama Yantra. Smoke ejecting machine. Made from a special Dumagarba alloy, it was meant to eject smoke fumes at high speed, presumably for thrust.
Smoke power.
And it also had these things called shandalas, described as elephant trunk-like structures.
Elephant trunks on a flying machine.
Yeah. Apparently, they aided flight by ejecting oil and steam fumes. Again, suggesting combustion and steam were involved in propulsion or lift somehow. It also had an electricity storage vessel and a central wind tunnel with bellows-like mechanisms inside.
Elephant trunks shooting out steam. That's certainly a unique design. Very different from, say, a modern jet engine.
Radically different, yeah. Highly unconventional from our perspective.
Okay, let's move on to the Rukma Vimana. You mentioned this one was golden.
That's its defining feature, yes. A striking golden color achieved by processing the Rajaloha metal in a specific way.
In its shape.
Its pitha, the base, was described as tortoise-shaped and massive, 1,000 feet long, though only a foot thick. A huge, flat platform.
1,000 feet. That's enormous. Like an aircraft carrier?
Bigger, actually. And it had fixtures for wheels on its 8 sides. These weren't ordinary wheels, though. They were electric tube wheels.
Electric tube wheels. How do they work?
The description mentions nalas, tubes or channels, toothed wheels, and electric wiring involved in propulsion. It gives a specific speed claim, too, about 250 miles per 24 minutes, which is, well, an odd way to state speed, but translates to over 600 mile per hour.
Wow. Very fast, propelled by electric wheels somehow. What about inside?
Simpler description here. It just mentions pillars made of mica for passenger seating. The focus seems to be on the size, color, and the electric propulsion system.
1,000-foot golden tortoise-shaped electrically propelled sky platform. That is quite the mental image.
Definitely spectacular.
Okay, finally, let's get to the Tripura Vimana. This was the one you said could travel on land, sea, and air, the ultimate all-terrain vehicle.
That's the one. Tripura implies 3 cities or enclosures, suggesting its multi-level structure. It was supposedly solar-powered.
Solar-powered. That's different from the others.
Yes, hints at a different, maybe more advanced energy source. And its key feature was that amphibious capability. It could literally alter its structure to travel on land, water, or air.
How to do that?
Well, the Pitha had markings for 80 boat-shaped containers called drones. These drones had retractable wheels for land travel.
80 boat-shaped pods with wheels.
Okay, and the construction material was heavily emphasized. Pure mica. But not just any mica. It had to undergo this incredibly detailed, complex purification process.
Purification again? What did that involve?
Numerous substances, acids, plant extracts, animal products, minerals, and multiple steps like heating, soaking, burying in the earth, exposure to sunlight. The end result was supposedly a form of mica that was super light, unbreakable, and unburnable. Truly remarkable properties.
A miracle material, basically, created through this intense process.
That's how it's presented, yes.
So an aircraft made of this super mica that can morph for land and water powered by the sun. The Tripura definitely sounds like the most ambitious, maybe the most fantastical of the Kritaka types.
It really embodies some of the more extraordinary claims within the text.
What else allowed it to be so versatile? Any other special features?
It had multiple levels, or avaranas. The second level used a metal called trinetra. The third used somanka loha, again, specialized, named materials.
Okay.
It had specific machinery, air protection yantras, a solar blaze conditioning yantra, presumably to handle the intense solar energy it used, and a rainstorm protection yantra, suggesting, like the hurricane halting machine, an ability to actively counter bad weather.
Weather control systems.
Seems like it. And on the third floor, there was a Ganapa yantra, a machine shaped like the deity Vineshwara, or Ganesha.
Shaped like Ganesha. What did it do?
It was said to be responsible for generating the electric power for the Vimana.
An elephant-headed, god-shaped generator.
Okay. And the mechanisms for moving on land and water were described too. Electric motors powered the ground wheels, which could retract. Sliding covers would then seal the hull, making it watertight for travel on or under the sea. It shows a conceptual grasp of how an amphibious vehicle might work.
Solar-powered, amphibious, multi-level, made of miracle mica, with weather control, and a Ganesha generator. The Tripura Vimana is really something else. It pushes the boundaries way beyond even the other Kritaka types.
It certainly does. It represents perhaps the peak of the technological imagination within this text.
Looking back at all of this, the different types, the mirrors, the engines, the metals, the pilot diets, it's undeniable that the Vimanika Shastra contains just a vast, incredibly intricate amount of detail, doesn't it? Whether you think it's fact or fiction, the level of description is immense.
It truly is. You go from the really puzzling origins of the text itself, how it came to be,
Right.
all the way to these incredibly specific descriptions of how Vimanas were supposedly built, what they could do, the materials, the power sources, even how they fit into this grand scheme of the yugas. It presents a comprehensive picture. Highly unusual, yes, often scientifically, well, implausible from our view, but comprehensive in its own internal logic.
And as we've touched on throughout, there are just these massive question marks hanging over it, aren't there? The authenticity, the actual origin, and the huge challenge of trying to square any of this with modern science or with history as we actually know it.
Absolutely. It remains deeply problematic on those levels. What this deep dive has hopefully done is offer you, the listener, a clear glimpse into this fascinating, very intricate world that the Vimanika Shastra imagines.
Yeah.
Whether you end up seeing it as, an elaborate piece of early 20th century fiction, maybe a product of misinterpretation or just wishful thinking, or maybe even, some might argue, a garbled reflection of some genuinely forgotten knowledge that got filtered through a much later lens. Whatever your take, the Vimanika Shastra undeniably sparks the imagination.
It really does.
It raises these profound questions about human ingenuity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the power of narrative, storytelling, and just our enduring fascination across all of history with the idea of flying.
That's a great way to put it. So maybe here's a final thought for you listening to kind of chew on. What does the existence of a text like this, so detailed, so specific, even if it seems unconventional or impossible to us now, What does it tell us about the human capacity for invention, for creating these incredibly complex narratives, and for our persistent dreams of taking to the skies, whether in ancient myths or modern rockets?
Hmm.
Where do you draw the line between imagination, maybe deeply held belief, and the possibility, however remote, of knowledge or technologies that challenge our current understanding of the past?
It's a fascinating line to ponder.
We genuinely love to hear your thoughts and interpretations on this. It's such a strange and compelling topic. Please feel free to share your comments and insights with us.
Indeed. It's definitely a rich area for more thought and discussion.
Please like, share, comment, and subscribe WizVibe YouTube channel for more interesting talk shows.